Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Delta, Quebec, Oscar, Paz, Tango,
There is nothing to be afraid of. It is only the wind, changing to the east. It is only your father, the thunder, your mother, the rain. In this country of water with its beige moon damp as a mushroom, its drowned stumps and long birds that swim where the moss grows on all sides of the trees. And your shadow is not your shadow, but your reflection. Your true parents disappear when the curtain covers your door. We are the others, the ones from under the lake, who stand silently beside your bed with our heads of darkness. We have come to cover you with red wool, with our tears and distant whispers. You rock in the rain's arms, the chilly arc of your sleep, while we wait, your night, father and mother, with our cold hands and dead flashlight, knowing we are only the wavering shadows thrown by one candle in this echo you will hear 20 years later. That is Night Poem by Margaret Atwood. Hello and welcome to Occult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and we also discuss a variety of occult, esoteric, and adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, science, art, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic. This is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you, if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. People can, will, and should disagree sometimes with the things I or my guests say on the show. How will we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things after all? Anyway, and like those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I can and often do revise my opinions or thoughts about things based on new evidence. Alright, very excited to share two great conversations with you all today. Rather than doing an episode within an episode for this one, we're going to be doing two acts. First up, I spoke with Casey Zabala about her grimoire oracle deck, Wyrd Sisters, a deck of spells and rituals, and about her process and rationale in creating it. Also discussed are the mushroom as a symbol, and how working with Saturn can teach us about forgiveness. We also talk about decolonizing witchcraft and Casey's educational offerings at modernwitch.org. During the second act of the episode, Gar shares about his new ebook, Meditation for Screen Addicts, which is aimed at helping those who feel they spend too much time looking at their phone turn that screen time towards more mindful purposes. Before we get into it here, let me remind you that if you like the show and the other work I've been getting into it, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me, and there are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy me a coffee is an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who is doing this. Your support makes the show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, thereby allowing myself to justify the time that I spend. I appreciate the opportunity to be making this podcast and to have the resources necessary to reach you all today. So many thanks to the people who are making that possible. Although I'm quite introverted and don't use social media more than this allows for, I'm not there like checking on stuff every day or anything like that. It's kind of a lot, but it certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you all or anything like that. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners, collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, etc. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can get me on Instagram at luxoccultpod, or find me on Blue Sky at luxastrata. That's LUXASTRATA. All right, let me tell you about my first guest here. Casey Zabala is a native Bay Area artist, writer, and tarot reader. Her self-published tarot deck, Wanderer's Tarot, is a feminist deck for modern witches. With 13 years of tarot experience, Casey has studied an intuitive approach to her readings while incorporating aspects of natural magic and manifestation techniques to her offerings. Passionate about mystical and magical arts, Casey hopes to do her part to heal the collective through individual tarot readings with artistic explorations. The Wyrd Sisters deck, this is Lux again, is a really cool and different take on an oracle system as well, so it was really kind of neat to hear Casey's thinking about constructing it. All right, lots of good stuff to get into here today, so I won't keep you any longer. I'll be back, of course, to introduce Act 2, but for now, let's roll into my conversation with Casey Zabala. All right, well, my guest today is Casey Zabala. Casey, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you so much for taking the time and everything. Well, we are here to talk about your deck, the Wyrd Sisters Oracle. I'm really stoked to get into it. There's some very cool cards in this thing, and it's kind of a cool approach to an oracle deck. But before we get into all of that, I'm hoping that you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your approach with the listeners and I.
Sure. I have been practicing divination since I was a teenager. I was gifted my first deck when I was 13, and it was sort of like this really big psychic awakening for me, and just opened up a new way of communing with the cosmos, understanding that, we are actually all interconnected and can speak to each other in some type of language. So divination for me is very much about connecting with spirits. It's very much about connecting with the gods, being inspired by the gods. And it's a practice that has really sort of influenced all of my other witchcraft practices, I would say. I've been practicing some form of witchcraft since my teenage years as well. I've worked with the Reclaiming Collective. I've been influenced also by occult paths, mystical paths that really center an animistic approach to the universe. And yeah, I guess that's basically my magical story in a nutshell. I'm also from California. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I now live in Northern California, and I am a new mother. So
Okay, right on. Congratulations. Very cool.
thanks.
One of the things that I really like about this deck is that it starts out with a sort of encouragement for the user to develop their own magic, create new spells just for themselves. And that's something that I really appreciate about this, is that it's a tool for people to empower themselves with. So maybe you could give us a little bit of context about first, like what this deck is. This is a grimoire oracle, which is a kind of fun spin on things, and maybe telling us a little bit about what the different types of cards are and why you chose to have these different categories and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. So the Wyrd Sisters Oracle deck was inspired by my work channeling or communing with the Wyrd Sisters, or the Fates, or the Norns. These sort of like threefold fate deities show up in many different cultures. And I started to connect with them as part of my divination practice, and really also as part of an ancestral reverence practice, because the Fates show up in sort of like Celtic ancestry and mythology as these ancestral deities that one communes with when you are at a crossroads or at moments of death, birth, and rebirth. So I was working with them in a spiritual sense, and during that time, I sort of received the encouragement from them to create a tool, a deck. I'm also the author of a tarot deck, so it wasn't totally out of the blue to get that message. And art is a big part of my practice. So received this message, and my practice of creating decks is very much ritualistic. So the process really involved a good amount of channeling and just reciprocal communication with the Wyrd sisters. And yeah, I think my relationship with them and sort of what I've gathered humbly is that, they are really deities or entities that encourage us to be on our own path, be walking authentically in our magic, and really be taking the reins, so to speak, of, participating in this world and kind of exploring. So that's sort of where the impetus for kind of this tool as an empowering tool, one that encourages people to create their own spells. I don't believe that magic is something that can be prescribed necessarily to a T. I think that it's really something that we co-create with the universe, and that all our spells are going to be completely unique to who we are and where we are and what our goals are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the deck kind of unfolds from there. It is made up of spell cards. It is made up of candle cards, magical tools, and sigils. And these are tools that, or I guess energies that I work with in my own magical practice. And I'm sure that's like broadly why they came through as such. But they're also can be very either elaborate or simple tools to connect with as a witch. So this deck sort of encourages you to explore how you relate to your candle magic practice, for instance, how elaborate or how simple you want to be with it.
Yeah, right on. I love that. So I'm hoping to ask you about a couple of individual cards that I found particularly interesting.
Sure.
First one was card 7, which is a spell for personal power. And one of the things that really struck me about this was that it's a person kind of sitting on top of a mushroom and meditating. It looks like they're kind of wearing their pajamas or something like that. They're very much in this like very comfortable state, just expressing their power. And it was such a powerful image to me, just because the mushroom is such a powerful symbol in my work and everything like that. And for some reason, this card was one of the ones that just leapt right out when I was opening the deck. It kind of just, as certain cards want to do with decks, they want to get your attention, and this card was certainly one of those. So I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit about your journey into making this card.
Sure, yeah. So I would say the Amanita mushroom has been an ally for me, and I'm developing a relationship with it currently. And I've never, disclaimer, like I've never ingested this mushroom, and I know there are people who do that, and it's a big part of their practice. But I started to just kind of come across them in nature, and I was able to kind of like sit with them and just kind of be in their presence. And they've given me a lot of, I guess, information or courage. And I find them to have this real energy that speaks to sovereignty, I would say, which for me really is about personal power, having autonomy and sovereignty over your own body, feeling a sense of belonging. I think that's something probably mushrooms of all types can kind of teach us about, this like network of mycelium. And that was sort of when I was meditating on this spell for personal power, the Amanita really just came through and wanted to be a part of that card. And it's interesting. It's definitely one that has caught a lot of people's attention. I feel like it strikes a chord with folks, especially folks who work with mushrooms.
Yeah, I love that. Very cool. There's a lot that you're saying that totally makes sense and is very much in line with my experiences of it as well. I love that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's interesting too, and the way that I create decks is very intuitive, and it's always a real joy to see how things really overlap with other people's intuitions and experiences. And yeah, I just feel really blessed to like be in a position where, we can connect over that and other people can too.
Yeah, I love that. So let's say people might be familiar with, doing divination with a Lenormand deck or a tarot deck or maybe a regular type of oracle deck. How would a person maybe change their divinatory practice when using this deck with these different types of cards? Like, how would we sort of pragmatically get into using this deck?
Sure. So I would say this deck is an invitation to do something with your divination. And this is a piece I didn't mention before, but part of working with the Wyrd sisters is, for me, has been less about like receiving information and more about being given like direct, I don't know, tasks or
Assignments,
suggestions.
perhaps.
Assignments is a great word. Yes, assignments, like little magical assignments. So that was a big thing for me when creating this deck. It is a divination deck and you can receive those insights. But what the deck really encourages you to do is to practice your magic around that insight. So the goal is to be open to what comes through, perhaps even, using this tool as a way to connect with your own personal path or your sense of fate, your sense of purpose or destiny, and then to kind of work your magic with whatever comes through. Create your own sigils, use the cards on your altar, incorporate them into your rituals. So that's the aim, I would say.
Right on. I love that. The other one I was kind of curious about was the spell for forgiveness, I think it was called. And I noticed that you had classified it under Saturn as its planetary ruler. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit about Saturn and forgiveness, because I think Saturn sometimes gets a really heavy rap of being this kind of like cruel taskmaster or like, somebody that's going to teach you a lot of harsh lessons.
Mm.
But I really like to see that other, side of it where, this forgiveness aspect, and I'm hoping we could explore that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Saturn is an incredible teacher. Like you said, can be an incredibly harsh teacher. And I think, from my own experience moving through Saturn return, it was such a time for me of tuning into like mistakes in quotes that I feel like I made or regrets, those heavier Saturnian energies that can really feel like an emotional burden. And, Saturn, while it is a harsh teacher, it is encouraging us to grow in one form or another. Like I really think of Saturn as that archetype of like the one who's harvesting something. And oftentimes we can't move forward from the past, another Saturnian energy, if we don't make peace with it or face it honestly, reckon with it in some way. So that's why Saturn is the sort of guiding influence in the spell for forgiveness, because it does take sort of discipline and honesty to show up in a moment of forgiveness, to really honor a mistake or a harm that has been caused. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Of course.
So is there a card in here that you feel is speaking to you really strongly right now, or is there one that you've been working with really heavily or anything like that?
That's a great question. I notice at times when I'm personally going through a lot of change that the Wyrd sisters, the 3 Wyrd sister cards in the deck, will start popping up for me. And right now, what is becoming is really showing up for me a lot.
That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big one. The other one that's coming up is the spell for Eros, or the sigil for Eros, excuse me. And this card is really about like participating in all that is in a really full way, which I mean, I think in times of real transition or shift or turmoil even, I think we can get really overwhelmed and tend to like numb out or future trip and just like generally not be very much in the present moment. So the sigil for Eros has been a reminder for me to like return to the sensual aspects of life that like make life worth living.
Yeah. That makes sense. There's probably a lot of Saturnian things to keep track of, lots of timetables and other things like that, I could imagine. So having that balancing aspect is probably really important. Right on.
Totally.
So is there anything that I didn't ask about that you would like to discuss? Or is there anything that you're excited about that you would like to share about, or anything along those lines, or questions that you have for me?
I'm curious about your connection with the mushroom, if you don't mind sharing.
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean,
sure. Yeah, it's been a really important symbol for me for maybe about the past 4 years or so. It's kind of a long story, but I'll sum it up into a nutshell. About 4 years ago, some friends and I began a sort of like magical experiment, a project, which was to create a magical current or, force using this sigil, a hypho sigil, a hypho meaning web. So the sigil looks like a mushroom, and the sort of metaphor that we're working here with magically is a biological one, having to do with this vascular, arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi that form these symbiotic relationships with trees. So this sort of metaphor is that if we, the practitioners, are like a forest of trees, like in this project, then this current, this hyphosigil, this, magical entity is this sort of mycelial web underground or unseen or existing in this like magical astral plane or however you want to think about it that can connect us and allow us to share resources and, support each other and other things like that. And there's this sort of idea of, connection, as you mentioned, of wanting to be part of something and everything and connectivity that really felt to me very adverse to some of the forces that we saw rising up, which were very much about painting divisions of people. There was a lot of unrest, like regarding like police brutality and like racial unrest and all kinds of other things. And so there was this sort of like rising tide that I wanted to find some energetic flavor to counteract. And so that's where this mushroom arose from, was this desire to like push back against this shit that we all are still, experiencing and stuff. And so it's so funny, like the words that came to me as, being part of this thing was, resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Like you mentioned sovereignty as being like something that was really important. And that was one of the first things that arrived to me, was this idea of sovereignty of self, but then also love of self. Like there's this idea of like these Venusian tides, having to do with Venus being very important as pushing against these like martial tides of like violence and stuff like that historically. So I sort of leaned on some of the historical work that was done there.
Beautiful.
Yeah, resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Again, Venus stuff. Also, resist with acts of radical kindness too, like trying to take the time and patience and empathy to like see past the misunderstandings that can sometimes occur in venues like social media, and try to get to the real kernels of the conversations and focusing on the path to better times. Like the idea that we have all of these stories about the apocalypse happening, or about, how things could go really shitty in the future. Like everybody loves cyberpunk. It's a fun genre, don't get me wrong, but like the idea of really trying to have more of like an optimistic outlook for what could be possible in the future and fantasizing about that and moving towards that. So yes, that's kind of in a nutshell what the mushroom has been teaching me, and yeah, really powerful and helpful ally, and I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you for asking.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating. I think, and I appreciate the work you're doing. It's so important to like be doing that big visioning work, and not fall prey to, the hopelessness that is like so easy to tune into right now.
It really can be. It really can be easy. There's this fantastic book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And this woman,
such a good one.
Yeah, okay, you've heard of it, right on. And I love how she talks about the poison of hopelessness, and that being one of these pitfalls we really do have to avoid, is like not getting sucked into that trap, and really, as hard as it might be sometimes, maintaining that optimism for the future and imagining ways that it could be better, because first we have to imagine the thing before we bring it into the world, as every magical practitioner probably has heard. So
absolutely. Yes. Which is why it's so important for, witches and magical practitioners to remember that and remember the power we wield as like revolutionaries.
absolutely. Well, this has been a fantastic time. Is there anything that you would like to mention or any last words that you would like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I just want to mention that I have a book coming out, which is an anthology I edited and curated, which represents the community Modern Witches. We are an educational community for occult, esoteric, and magical practitioners. And the anthology is really about decolonizing witchcraft, bringing it into the future and what that means for us as magical practitioners. And there are a host of really amazing essays in there from some incredible authors. And that's coming out in October. And we will also be hosting a symposium, Witches Confluence, in the fall on November 2nd in San Francisco. And we will have a keynote event from Jessica Lanyadu. Some amazing teachers are going to be there. Dory Midnight, Amanda Yates Garcia, Maria Minnis, Madre Jaguar. I mean, so many really incredible people. And your listeners can tune into that at modernwitches.org.
Okay, right on. I love that. Would you mind offering a little bit of a teaser about the concept of decolonizing witchcraft? I think this is such an important thing that comes up in so many conversations, so I'd love to hear a little snippet of that from this anthology.
Yeah, sure. So many of our authors speak to this in so many various different ways, but we really try to push forward this concept of like a non-appropriative craft. So making sure that as a magical practitioner, you understand the lineages you're working with, whether intellectual or ancestral, and really being in integrity when you're working with any knowledge systems or practices that are indigenous, and understanding, where your information is coming from, sharing your teachers, with the aim of ultimately cultivating more sense of belonging. And I speak to this as a person who lives on occupied Shasta territory up in Northern California, as someone who, has ancestry of settler colonizers. For me, it's just been a really important journey of being in right relationship with the land I tend, to my own lineage, and to the practices that I am connected with.
I love that. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, we're trying. It's not an easy road, and it's full of complexity and nuance, but the more we all talk about it, I think the more well we will all become.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, you're right. It's not an easy road. I think that so often doing the ethical thing and doing the easy thing are not the same. So
Exactly. Yes.
yeah.
Especially in late stage capitalism.
Yes, exactly. There can be very few avenues for, well, yes, I don't want to get us down that road of hopelessness again. But yes, there are ways to do things that in ways that you can feel better about is what I will say, at least. Supporting, local creators and things like that, or, things that you can feel better about. But yes, there's ultimately no ethical consumption under late stage capitalism.
Yes.
But yes. Speaking of which, no, I'm so joking. Where can listeners
yes,
find
exactly.
your work?
Well, I'm on the monster that is Instagram. So you can follow me there at Wanderers Tarot. I also have a Substack, which is called Hedge Spells, where I share ramblings and wild seeds about witchcraft and the Wyrd sisters. And I share astrological ramblings as well there too. So you can find me on Substack. And yeah, check out Modern Witches if you're interested. We're at modernwitches.org or at Witches Confluence on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Casey. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been really great to connect. Thanks for having me on.
3, Romeo, 2, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo.
Greetings, it is I, Luxa from the future. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that you're enjoying the episode so far. Thanks so much to Casey Zabala for joining me. You can find links in the show notes to modernwitches.org and Wyrd Sisters, a deck of spells and rituals. Approaching now to Act 2 of the podcast, I spoke with Gar about his new ebook, Meditation for Screen Addicts, which is aimed at helping those who feel they spend too much time looking at their phone turn that screen time towards more mindful purposes. After that, we'll do listener mail and shoutouts, and I'll tell you about a ceremony that I concocted, which is aimed at enchanting items to be donated to shelters for survivors of domestic violence and people experiencing homelessness and things like that. I'm sharing it in case anybody else would like to get in on that action. It's a great time of year to do that type of thing, but it is always helpful regardless of the time of year. Okay, so moving into Act 2 of the show here, there are a lot of different schools of thought surrounding meditation out there. Practices which are helpful and work well for some people can actually have a harmful effect on others. It's been shown that some types of meditation can have lasting negative side effects for some people, but this usually comes up for people when they are told to keep doing something that's having. I like to mention this in conversations about meditation because, as I tell Gar during our conversation, I've run into some rather rigid one-size-fits-all thinking surrounding this stuff. If you're like me, one-size-fits-all doesn't usually fit that well, and I have to make adjustments and stuff. So giving ourselves permission to make those adjustments and course corrections, etc., rather than charging forward with something that's causing friction or whatever, can be a really useful and even powerful thing to do, and one that I think a lot of magicians might struggle with. I know that I sometimes do and have in the past for sure. The sunken cost fallacy is part of this, and we tend to be kind of a headstrong lot, of course, but sometimes the only way out is through, and sometimes it is back the way you came or some other direction. And we're usually the only ones with the proper context to be able to tell what that is for ourselves. All right, anyway, finding places where we can make small adjustments that can have big net impacts is sort of along the lines of what Gar's project about. So I'm so stoked to share the conversation we had about it. I hope you enjoy. Cheers. All right, well, my guest today is Guérie. Not quite sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but we'll talk about that. Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I tried to pronounce it Guérie.
So, and the name might have a little bit to do with this. What type of context would you like to give the listeners as we set up to talk about your very cool project, which is about finding ways of using screen time for meditative purposes? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's definitely fair to say. So basically, I consider myself to someone who is afflicted a little bit with what I call screen addiction. So maybe it's good to start off with, there's no medical advice in here. I'm not a doctor, not a psychologist, psychiatrist, any of those stuff. So this is all for fun and entertainment. So that nastiness is out of the way. Yeah, so from what I understand, screen addiction is not a diagnosable term exactly. It's like a colloquial term. Obviously, every part of the world has its own definitions, but from what I understand, it's just a colloquial term for people who, are addicted to spending time on their phone, on their PC, on playing video games, that kind of thing. And I myself consider myself someone who's struggling with screen addiction, particularly with phones. And I see that in a lot of my friends and my people of younger generation around me. And I'm also a long-time meditation practitioner, meditator, whatever you want to call it. And I've tried, a bunch of different ways of meditation. I've tried everything from the Sam Harris app to, Rudolf Steiner stuff and Franz Barden stuff and the Quarrier course and Room Soup stuff. And so I've tried a lot of different methodologies, and I can see the benefits of it. And even though I'm still to this day struggling with it, and trying to, balance that struggle with my screen addiction, I can see the changes in my ability to focus, the changes in my, what kind of focus I can give to things, and meditation does help to ease that a lot. So it came to me one day that basically I think there's a way for people who maybe feel like they have a screen addiction to try and take steps away from that. And I don't see a lot out there. Maybe I just didn't find it, but I don't see a lot of out there for people who have an interest in meditation, they know it's good for them. Maybe they should do it, but they can't just build up the time to focus, or they can't build up the discipline or practice time. That each most meditation practices sort of start off with, like, step one is very often, okay, sit there and focus for 5 minutes. And for someone who's got the attention span that's been curated by YouTube and shorts and reels and all this stuff, 5 minutes of sitting there focusing on either nothing or focusing on a point of an object or whatever is a very tall order. So I felt that there's a way to bring people, ease them into some sort of meditation practice, almost trick them into doing it. People who consider themselves, or who might be like me, find themselves addicted to spending time on their phone, particularly, but on screens in general. So what I decided to do is to break the book up into tiny little segments, almost format the book. Well, what I had in mind was like a YouTube reel or an Instagram reel, a YouTube short and Instagram reel, that kind of thing, to format it in such a way that each page is like a second or two on a video. So I tried to get even the font of the Kindle to look like subtitle fonts, but it turns out that Kindle doesn't support that kind of font. So, or at least you can change it on the user side. So just like formatting the page in a way that would be more inviting for someone who spends a lot of time looking at YouTube and stuff like that, and keeping it really bite-sized, keeping it really cheesy language like you'd hear on YouTube, and stuff like that, and giving them very, very succinct instructions, very memorable steps, and try and get them to step by step, very big, small baby steps, going towards like a meditation practice, and not really focusing on, and starting off like with the exercises even 2 or 3 seconds long. So stuff that people who are more practice meditators will kind of scoff at, and it's really not aimed at people who are very familiar with meditation, like occult practitioners or anything like that. It's more, as I say, people who maybe suspect that they have a screen addiction. They know meditation is good for them, but they haven't done anything or can't find a way into that world. And I think people who don't know they have a screen addiction, they probably wouldn't take these steps towards meditation anyway. So I feel like there's a bunch of people out there that, they know they should be meditating. They should be spending less time on their screens. Digital detox is probably too much, but there's no like easy way in it. Or maybe they've tried, as I say, they've tried a meditation practice, and it's like step one, sit there for 5 minutes, and it's just too tall an order. But I think people who are occult practitioners or long-term meditators will get a kick out of it anyway. They'll find something in there, because as I say, I've tried a gazillion different ways of meditating, and I tried to draw from as many different sources as I could think of. Steiner and Franz Barden and Quarea, as I said. So I think people who are very familiar with the practices will get a little kick out of them. People who go through the book, they don't necessarily have to go through page 1 to page, I think it's only 50 pages long. Again, like really bite-sized, really tailored for people who have really short attention spans. They can go through it and just, stop at any point and see where they're comfortable starting or ending. And it's structured in a way that's like, I split it into days. What I explained at the start, that a day is not necessarily like a calendar day. It can just be a cycle. So if you feel like you're finished with the first step, you can just move on to the next step, or the next cycle, or the next day, as I called it. And you can skip ahead, you can go back, and yeah.
So what is this project called?
Oh, sorry. The book is called Meditation for Screen Addicts.
Oh, okay, cool. I wasn't sure if it had a different title. Meditation for Screen Addicts. That's awesome. Very descriptive. Very cool. And where can people find this?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon Kindle. I did have kind of a plan in my head somewhere to make it a physical mobile phone shaped book maybe as well. But for now, it's just on Kindle. Yeah.
Okay,
And it's
very cool.
it's as cheap as I could make it, because, as I say, it's very bite sized. It's very short. And if you're a long-term meditator and you know this stuff like inside out, and this kind of thing isn't necessary for you, then you probably know somebody that spends too much time on their phone, that maybe you think they could benefit from some meditation practices. You could throw it at them for Christmas or something.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's a lot of different ways of meditating out there. I think that there's some kind of rigid thinking that exists in some occult circles about certain types of meditation being maybe like better or more powerful or whatever than others. And I'm not sure if the actual, like, now, the more that we learn about psychology as we like move forward in time and stuff, these things are sometimes studied clinically and stuff, and every individual has very different experiences with them and stuff too. So I think it's important for people to remember that like just because a practice is working really well for your friend doesn't mean it's for you, right? And if this is an inroad into something that you think might be helpful to you, then why not give it a shot? So yeah, very cool.
Exactly, yeah. And I forgot to say as well that in between the meditation practices, there's lots of like timeout breaks to assess, see how you feel, and there's lots of little snippet, like bite-size phrases or paragraphs or sentences, just to, if you don't actually do the meditation practice, at least have a look at the little bite-size snippets, and it'll get you thinking about what your favorite color is and why is it your favorite color, and to delve into more into that, and just sort of trigger a daydream, to be honest, because I find that people who, like myself, struggling with staring at YouTube all day, they find it hard to focus on anything for more than just a few seconds. So triggering a daydream about a topic, something that we do naturally as kids, to refresh that ability, just to sit and to even for 1 minute is an achievement for someone who I think is, in air quotes, a screen addict.
Yeah, or just I like that there are these little opportunities or invitations for self-reflection in there as well. I think that that's something that we're not maybe always encouraged to do enough in our days. And yeah, very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully someone will get something tiny out of it. I don't have any huge marketing plans or something. So hopefully, even if one person out there spends that $3 on it and gets a little kick out of it, even makes it question themselves about what meditation is, what's acceptable as meditation, and as you say, finding their own little path in meditation, not necessarily following the big structures that are out there that everyone says they have to do. Just baby steps towards some kind of practice is whether they eventually find a better practice somewhere along the way later. That's also one of my hopes, that they just get inspired to just even inquire about what is meditation at all from the start, and find a little practice themselves.
Sure, yeah, we all have to start somewhere. So I'm curious, what have you learned about meditation, or has your practice maybe changed throughout the course of this project? I'm curious how this has affected your own meditation practice, or maybe the way that you think about meditation.
Sure. Well, I've been a lot more softer on myself, I think. When I started this writing this little book, the ideas that I had, not just for the project, but for meditation in general, quite like rigid and copy pasted from the big structures that we all know out there. What exactly the results should be and what exactly the practice should look like and so on. And as I tried to write something that was not for people who know anything about meditation or spiritual practices in general, I guess, yeah, I learned to be a bit more lenient with myself and accepting of slightly different methodologies and so on. Maybe not methodologies is too strong a word, but slightly different practices that you just feel comfortable with in yourself.
Yeah, very cool. Oh, I love that. So, if you have any words of advice or thoughts you would like to offer the listeners and this would be an awesome time.
Ooh, that's a bit philosophical that's above my pay grade. Well, I think meditation is a super important practice. Even if the most, let's say, hardcore materialist, matter only mind, there's no free will kind of Sam Harris person. I mentioned I tried his meditation practice.
That guy drives me crazy. Sorry.
Yeah, that's why I brought him up.
Yeah, man. Sorry. Well, I'll say mean things about him later. Never mind.
I'll just +1 your whatever mean things you got to say about it. But yeah, even for the most materialist sort of practitioner out there, and for all the things we could say about Sam Harris, at least he brings meditation to the table of people who would probably just scoff at it the whole of their lives. So we all know it's good for us, and for me, the most important thing on a day-to-day basis, especially for people who are staring into YouTube all day, who have their attentions, not just their attentions, but their subsequent thoughts and the structure of their mind and the way that they're looking at the world, has been shaped by, let's say, digital media and what we stare at in our phones, and the ability to take a small step to knowing boundary between what your mind is, what's coming from your mind, and what's been planted there from YouTube creators, even innocently, Like we all know how commercials work and the whole history with psychology there. So that's just in hyperdrive right now. So the more that we get to know our minds, at least, the more we can see where and what and how things are influencing us from outside, and be more in control of our lives, essentially, not get so sucked in by commercials and up likes and clicks and whatever. That it could be good or bad, but at least we know that the influences, where the influences are coming from. The more we meditate, hopefully, the more we'll be familiar with that kind of with the landscape, with the mindscape. Is that too cheesy?
No, that makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of another maybe very cheesy thing that I've been involved in, which is a pop culture magic working based on John Carpenter's film They Live. We're calling it Project Specs because it's about enchanting sunglasses so that we're able to see through the signal the way that Rowdy Randy Piper, the character in this movie, is able to see through this. He's able to put on these sunglasses, which are able to allow him to understand that the Earth is being invaded by space aliens, and he can do something about it, maybe. But the movie was made in response to Reaganomics, so there's all these really interesting political undertones to it that we've been playing with, and yeah, it reminds me of that. So the idea of really parsing out where are these messages coming from? You brought up psychology. I'm thinking about Edward Bernays and propaganda, and that the whole kind of premise of that was that the media is a tool for controlling the way that the population thinks, and sort of always has been, just because we're humans and we're social creatures and everything is a feedback loop. So that's just how it is, not necessarily like by any malice on anybody's part. So when we can be intentional about what we're putting into that feedback loop and what it will give back to us, which I think is part of what your project does, I think that can be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't say it better myself. And exactly, the more you are enmeshed in what the digital mediascape is feeding your mind, the less you can discern how it's influencing you, and the more you'll behave in the way that it's curating your behavior to be in the same way that a sugar addiction is. Basically your microbiome is overrun with the sugar, the microbes that are coming from sugar. So the more that you have in your microbiome, the more your brain will be instructed by your body to go eat more sugar and tell other people to eat sugar. So it's sort of a digital media version of that, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Actually, this is a sidebar. I'm given to understand that it's like that with any food. Like you can sort of train your biome to crave what you eat. So that's a very good, for better or worse, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I delving into nutrition at once upon a time, and that's basically it. Yeah, you can train your body to like anything.
Obviously, people have allergies and all of that. That's real. I'm not trying to discount that, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there about this feedback loop and how this happens on so many different levels. And I feel like I've gotten us deep into the weeds here. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me and share about your very cool project. Before I let you go, would you mind explaining the significance of the name that you chose?
The author name is essentially a translation of to heal. I prefer to be anonymous for this project for various reasons. So I chose a name that is people can go have fun figuring it out. If 3 seconds of fun figuring it out, but if
I love it. Okay, well, here's a little puzzle for you to solve.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Gar. Well, this has been super fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a very big, exciting honor to be asked to come on to chat to your illustrious self.
Oh, well, thank you.
On your awesome podcast.
I'm very flattered. Thank you so much for reaching out and for taking the time to talk with me about this. And I love this idea. It always makes me happy when people are putting out things, putting offerings out there, which are, opening up inroads for people to access magical technologies and gain more self-agency and all of that good stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you too, and you're very welcome.
All right, thanks so much to both Gar and to Casey Zabala for joining me for this episode. You will find links in the show description and notes about all the cool things that we talked about today. Unlike last time, this episode will not feature me doing any 20-minute monologues about philosophy in which I take apart what I think sucks about a given thing, like I did with accelerationism. That sort of needed to be said. And although I was a little nervous that some people would be unhappy with me for saying it, I'm glad that I did. And I actually heard from several of you that you were super into it, which is pretty heartening to hear. So fuck yeah. I'm going to bid you all a fond farewell soon here for this episode, but we do have a few things to take care of before I do. I did promise to say a few mean things about author and intellectual featherweight Sam Harris. I will talk that shit in a second here, and after that we will do listener mail and shoutouts. But first, let me be diligent in reminding you that if you like the show and you're into what we've got going on over here at Lux Occult, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy reading from me. Making this show is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster. But it means a lot to me to be able to do it. Thanks so much to people who are making that possible by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee, and the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell all of your friends, enemies, frenemies, allies, and magical associates about it, as well as everybody you meet at your work holiday parties. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that's possible. Both of these things are super helpful, so thank you to everybody who is doing that stuff. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of that follow button or alarm thingy or whatever it is on your app so you can get updates when a new episode comes out. Okay, as promised, let's talk a little shit, shall we? First off, if you like listening to people say mean things about the types of books that everybody reads in airports, you'll love the podcast If Books Could Kill. I'm not affiliated with it or whatever, I just enjoy it. Anyway, they recently did a great job taking Sam Harris apart in an episode, which gave me shudders of delight to listen to. When I read Sam Harris's book Free Will, I was astonished by the way he set up a very flawed premise regarding ontology, to the point where it seemed like he really didn't grasp the concepts he was describing, and then proceeded to charge ahead and build his entire argument about there being no free will upon this very sad and flawed premise. It was super abundantly clear to me as somebody with a background in science, which for me included a lot of stuff about experimental design or whatever. I'm not an expert in this, but I did learn about it. It's really abundant that he didn't grasp the implications of some of the experiments that he was talking about either. I feel like it's bad enough when reporters or other types of people misinterpret the findings of an experiment and start making all types of claims about things based on it. But when we get that from an academic, it's straight up embarrassing. The book Free Will was fucking a pathetic attempt, in my view. It's why I find it so irritating that it seems to be so popular and people are taking this argument seriously. My opinion of Sam Harris at that point was that he's an ideologue trying to use science to push his own faith-based agenda. And here I mean faith that there is no free will or no God or whatever, which he's clearly very emotionally invested in. When I listened to the If Books Could Kill podcast episode about his book, The End of Faith, I learned that not only is Sam Harris an ideologue trying to use science to push his own faith-based agenda and embarrassing the people who actually understand the topics he covers while doing so, but he's apparently also quite racist and bigoted in other ways. What a surprise that this person who apparently has such a hard time unpacking subject matter and reasoning things through would also have other bad and stupid ideas about things. Miss me with all of your bullshit, Sam Harris. Alright, you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or at luxoccultpod on Instagram or Luxestrada on Blue Sky Social if you have thoughts you would like to share about any of that or whatever else you'd like to share for listener mail. Speaking of which, let's get into listener mail and shoutouts. Shout out and much love to all the Pocket Wizards and Mushrotters. I really appreciate being exposed to all the awesome creative and magical projects y'all have going on. So fucking smart and talented motherfuckers. Really proud to know y'all. Happy birthday to Turtle Man on Instagram. I hope you had an awesome one. Greetings to everybody that I met at Avalon's Hippie Holiday Festival recently. Thanks for coming out for that. Hello to Sam Shadow. I hope you're doing well. As I mentioned earlier, several people reached out about the little exploration of chaos magic and accelerationism I did in the last episode. Thank you for the kind words. I'm really glad that there were people out there who found it helpful. Fuck yeah. Shout out to Chelsea and Travis at 12 Talons, excited for our Tarot and Brews endeavors. Shout out to Revelor Press, where you can find one of my Psalms to Hecate published. Don't forget to grab your copy of Serpents of Circe to see that and a bunch of other really cool magical offerings. And shout out to Claudvis, who asked this really interesting question on the Discord that I figured I would share here because I think it's a fun thing to think about. So Claudvis asks, I don't know if this has been speculated on before, but have we considered the possibility that there are gods or powerful spirits who participate in discussions on this Discord server? So I think this is a really interesting question. I'll share what I wrote back to Claudius here. I suppose we'd first need to define what we mean by participate. In a very literal sense of what that might mean, I'd say it's unlikely that Loki or somebody would make a Discord account and ask me for a link there. But from a more abstract perspective, I think it's absolutely the case that we have participation from powerful spirits or whatever. I'd support this by pointing out that since most people on the server are engaged with a magical practice, they might be acting as a team with their own magical allies. My quote team unseen, which is my nerdy way of describing my magical crew, informs the way that I participate here and elsewhere in my life in the world. In addition to this basic situation, which would apply to any kind of magical type server, this particular one is organized around an ongoing magical project. The green mushroom itself is an egregore we discovered / phrase / whatever causal relationship one chooses to ascribe to how these things come into being, and have been cultivating a mutually beneficial symbiosis type relationship with. And there have been a lot of interesting things that have come up for participants regarding parallel thoughts and experiences regarding this, egregore, suggesting that there's the conceptual fidelity present in the situation which you would expect from interacting with something like a god or well-defined egregore or whatever. I'm definitely grateful to be part of doing this work. It's been a really wild ride so far. And yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this stuff, and this experiment is sort of part of investigating a little bit about how that comes into play for us. Take this opportunity to say much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, whatever that looks like for you in your practice. And you can find more information about that in the show notes or by joining our Discord server. All right, so shout out to everybody who reached out. Whether or not it was featured, know that all the missives I receive are appreciated. I'm incredibly lucky to have such rad listeners. Keep kicking ass out there. Much gratitude to everybody who's supporting the show by rating, reviewing, and giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Fuck yeah, thank you. If you'd like to send me thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions, as I said, you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, at luxoccultpod on Instagram, or luxestrada on Blue Sky Social. A quick programming note here. There's going to be a special bonus episode of the show made in conjunction with the XV Planis podcast hitting the digital airwaves between December 26th and 28th, featuring Alan Greenfield to talk about his new book, Secrets of the Real Black Lodge Revealed. It's a wild ride down several rabbit holes, which I think those who are into unpacking layered meanings and things will enjoy. It's probably not for the faint of heart. As I'm editing it, the beast is 3 hours long. We'll see how that goes, though I'm not done editing it yet. We get into some very interesting territory and out there stuff, and touch on many topics of interest of mine, such as the TV series Twin Peaks, UFOs and UAPs, and what the government knows and all of that. What is the nature of the phenomena? What does Alan mean when he says the real Black Lodge, which is a concept that comes up in Twin Peaks and elsewhere? We get into all kinds of wild stuff. We talk about Carrie Thornley and Discordianism and Robert Anton Wilson and all kinds of other things, which I think you all might enjoy. I'm releasing it as a bonus because it's a bit of a departure from what we typically cover here on this show. I was asked to be a guest host on XV Planis podcast to help interview Alan. Since he writes about the intersections of occultism and paranormal and UFO lore, I was asked to come assist with the occult side of things. Eris had other plans, though, hell Eris, and Flood was unable to make it to most of the recording due to emergent circumstances which arose. So I put on my tinfoil hat, accessed my pretty considerable bank of knowledge about spooky nerd shit, and conducted the interview as best I could in Flood's place. Maybe a little bit along the lines I was more curious about, though. It's an interesting conversation if you're into getting into abstract, esoteric stuff and are into wandering through twisted tunnels. I think there's a lot of interesting things to sort of parse out there. I'm releasing the episode during the time frame I mentioned to commemorate the Rendlesham Forest incident back in 1980. Those familiar with UFO lore will already know about this, but a series of reported sightings of unexplained lights near Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England was seen, which became an important part of modern UFO mythology. I produced a sound magic track about it, which features Flood from XP Planis called Eyes of Your Eyes, which I released last year during the Rendlesham anniversary. These are the weird holidays I celebrate. I'll play that track for you at the end of the episode here. I'm also working on another episode featuring Tom Banger to talk about his experiences being the lead organizer for Temple of Psychic Youth in North America. Earlier this year, when I announced our plans for creating Void House, which is Green Mushroom Project's newest adventure in creating a consent-forward space in which to conduct magical work both in person and online, Tom Banger let me know that he was into the idea and wanted to help out, which I really appreciate. I told Tom that it would be really valuable if he would allow me to pick his brain about his experiences being an organizer for Topi. I was curious to hear about what worked, what didn't, and what he learned along the way that he would pass on to future magicians in similar circumstances. It's a really raw and honest conversation. I'm so grateful to be able to share it with you all. That will be out next month on the 23rd. There's all sorts of other rad content coming your way too. We would be here all day if I went into all the cool conversations I've recorded and the stuff that I'm working on for this show and have yet to share. I think I said it last time, but these are good problems to have as a podcaster. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk with so many cool and interesting people for this show and to have such fucking rad listeners, so thank you. So I want to share with you, before I let you go, about a little ceremony I concocted recently. Some context here. As I prepare to move, I've been finding different organizations to donate things to. This led me to begin working on a little project with Hecate, who is my mighty patroness. When others expressed interest, I wrote up what I was working on to share with people so they could likewise do similarly if they were into it. In the show notes, you will find a link to a ceremony called Caranodia, which is a Hecatian ceremony for enchanting items for domestic abuse survivor shelters. It's designed to imbue things we donate to shelters with protective and other helpful qualities. A little extra magical oomph, if you will. As I said, you can find a link to that in the show notes, and it's also on my Linktree. I think that this might have something to do with my work with Hecate, but in my life I sort of have stuff about systemic issues surrounding why people end up in these shelters or other things like that. I don't almost shoved in my face in a way. Maybe it speaks to my own privilege that it's the case that it would take working with Hecate to sort of have the awareness of these things too. I think about that. I'm not sure. I have some lived experience that could also be a factor in understanding some of this, but it's complicated. I definitely think about it a lot. Anyway, there are things about how these abuse dynamics and other things like that in society operate. It just seems so crystal clear to me, while at the same time it seems like most people don't see it, or they don't care, or whatever. It's you're sort of watching a different movie than the people around you are or something. It's one of the challenges that I've been tasked with grappling with as part of my life path, or whatever term you'd like to use for themes which arise over and over in one's life. But seeing stuff kind of right in your face that might be invisible to those around you, and the sort of frustration and at times feelings of alienation that this can bring. One thing that I work with in my magical practice, and which Hecate has taught me to really refine in a lot of ways, has to do with using the energetic dynamics which result from imbalance created by the things I mentioned earlier. It's a type of alchemy where the problem generates energy which can be used towards its own solution. I sometimes suspect that the phrase, "evil contains the seeds of its own destruction," is sort of along these lines, maybe esoterically, though the terms evil and destruction might not enter into the equation in terms of how I'm looking at things. Anyway, I want to say how grateful I am for the opportunity to channel some of this frustration and other stuff that I feel into working towards solutions, even if it's in a very small way. Shit can be fertilizer if properly processed and applied. Hecate and the green mushroom have both been incredibly helpful for me in figuring out what this looks like for me in my life and helping me maintain resilience and hope for the future. It's a battle sometimes, but one that is well worth fighting. Solidarity to everybody out there fighting their own battles of life, and whatever it means for you in your practice and your situation, let me remind you to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Casey Zabala and to Gar for joining me. Check out the show notes for links to all the awesome stuff we talked about today. Thank you so much for all the kind words and support for this show and my other work I've been getting. Appreciate all the help and support from both unseen and seen sources. Gratitude, Void, and Hal Hecate. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Estrada reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Alright, this is Eyes of Your Eyes, produced by me, featuring Folds and Floods. Cheers.
There's something very, very strange. Get the headset on, see if it gets any stronger. Okay. Give us some. Wait, I noticed that this is on a battery too. It's on a battery? Okay. It has been removed. Okay. This is falling off again. Yeah. Strange.
Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Welcome to XV Planet. Greetings, friends, fiends, and lovers of strange and wondrous things. My name is Flood, and I am the host of XV Planets, a bi-weekly podcast of the odd and unusual. The core of XV Planets is a documentary-style exploration into paranormal investigations that I and my ever-evolving group of magical misfits conduct. We take a look at the history, the mystery, then go see it for ourselves, and then we bring that experience, and on occasion that evidence, to your ears. Alongside the investigations, you'll find a treasure trove of other content, like interviews with authors, art historians, mediums, UFO researchers, cryptid hunters, fellow paranormal investigators, as well as deep dives into the arts, exploring topics like the Killing Joke frontman Jazz Coleman's magical practices and how that propelled the band forward, and whether or not David Lynch was really conducting occult rituals through Twin Peaks: The Return. So follow XV Planets today and get caught up on the journey, because I can promise you, it only gets stranger from here. I'll see you on the fifth plane.